being 6 p.m. This Town of Ayer Zoning Board of Appeals, Wednesday, March 17th, 2021, open session remote participation meeting. At 6 p.m., we're going to call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is to approve of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, sorry, could you read the COVID disclosure first on the agenda?
I'll try, Carly. It's printed kind of small.
Do you want me to do it? I can do it for you if you want.
Can you do that? I can't read it.
I can totally.
Thank you.
So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Ayer Zoning Board of Appeals is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort has been made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided in the governor's order. All votes will be taken by roll call.
Do you need to announce who's here from the zoning board or?
Yes. Sam, do you want to do that?
Yeah, zoning board of appeals roll call. Julio? Gugino, thank you, I'm sorry.
Big fail.
John Ellis,
Yes.
Mike Gibbons,
Yes.
myself, Sam Goodwin, and we're missing Ron DeFlippio. And Carly's here, so we have a quorum for the ZBA. Now, as I said, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Take a motion. Mike,
I move that we approve the agenda of 3/17/2021.
Second,
it's been motioned and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Identify a voice vote.
Jessica Gino, aye.
John,
John Ellis, aye.
Mike,
Mike Gibbons, aye.
Sam Goodwin, aye. Next item on the agenda is Chapter 40B Comprehensive Permit Training by Paul J. Harvey. Is Mr. Harvey present?
It's Haverty. I don't see him on there, but he did confirm today that
Haverty, I'm
he
sorry.
will be here. Do you want to do the minutes while we wait for him?
Sure, absolutely. We can take it. Well, it's out of turn.
That's okay.
I saw no error. Well, I didn't see any error with the problem with the second set of minutes that came out.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry. I looked at that and I said, no, that's not Carly's meeting. No.
I've never done that before.
All right, I make a motion. We approve the minutes of the meeting for January 20th, 2021.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Voice vote by identification, please.
Jessica Gino, aye.
John,
John Ellis, aye.
Mike,
Mike Gibbons, aye.
Sam Goodwin, aye.
It
Minutes
looks
are
like
approved
Ron
as
DeFilippo's have come on.
posted. Excuse me?
Looks like Ron DeFilippo has come on.
I haven't seen him yet. Okay.
I see him on my screen, but he's muted.
There he is.
There.
Good
There,
evening,
there,
Ron.
there.
Good
Good
evening.
evening. It's so good to meet this way.
Yeah. Well, we just approved the minutes of the meeting for January 20th, and we're waiting for our Chapter 40B trainer. So what do we do now, Carly?
So I would just take a brief recess until he joins. I'm going to just check and call him. Or Alicia, have you heard from him?
I just checked my.
Oh, here he comes. He's coming in right now. I just admitted him.
There he is.
Yeah, I apologize. For some reason, I had it in my calendar at 7 o'clock rather than 6. And I just noticed that the link was for 6.
Welcome.
Welcome.
We've been through pretty much everything we can do. It's all in your court now.
All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen. Do I need permission to do that?
Yeah, I can make you a co-host unless. Cindy, is he
Yep.
able to
Yeah,
share his screen?
I just turned sharing on,
Yep,
Carly.
okay, I got it, yep.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Yep.
Okay.
Is this a lecture style or is it interactive?
Oh, it's so much better to do it interactive. Feel free to jump in with questions whenever you want. And if we don't follow the form of the PowerPoint, that's probably better anyways.
Very good. Thank you.
So a little introduction. My name is Paul Haverty. I am acting as a consultant for the Mass Housing Partnership for this development. Mass Housing Partnership has a program where it provides technical assistance to local boards of appeals, and there is a list of different trainers or consultants that you can choose from. I happen to be an attorney. I'm with Blattman, Bobrowski and Haverty in Concord, Massachusetts. However, you could have gone with a planner, an engineer. There's a number of different services that MHP provides through this process. But the purpose of the process is to assist the boards in navigating the comprehensive permit process, which can be a little bit foreign to a board because the requirements are different than the types of applications that you're used to hearing. So I'm just going to go quickly through. Let's see, yeah. So, and has an application been filed yet, or are we still waiting for it?
No, nothing's been filed.
We're still waiting for an application. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do when you get an application in is make sure that they have complied with the submittal requirements, and those submittal requirements are in the regulations. But the biggest thing is that they need a project eligibility letter from a subsidizing agency.
From who?
Subsidizing agency. So there are 4 different state subsidizing agencies that grant project eligibility letters under Chapter 40B. You can get one from DHCD under a number of different programs. It could either be through the local initiative program, which is frequently called the friendly 40B process. So that's essentially a town-sponsored 40B development. But there are other types of PELs that DHCD issues, including for low-income housing tax credit projects and things of that nature. Mass Development and MHP also issue 40B project eligibility letters, but most frequently an eligibility letter is going to come from Mass Housing. I would say they probably do 80% of the eligibility letters. So there are certain statutory safe harbor requirements that a town can assert when a comprehensive permit application is submitted. So that is if you have more than 10% of your year-round housing units restricted as affordable units, then that's the most commonly known safe harbor, the 10% threshold. There's also a 1.5% total land area zoned for residential, commercial, or industrial use threshold. That is something that never really got called into play too frequently until about 4 or 5 years ago. And then towns really started to look into this issue and try to determine whether or not they met this. The HCD within the last 2 years has issued a list of guidelines as to how to determine the 1.5%, but it's mostly going to be applicable to sort of the inner suburb communities that have a fair amount of affordable housing development on large areas of land, but ultimately are really small, dense communities. As you get further away from Boston, the likelihood of complying with the 1.5% gets lower and lower, simply because the land area in the town tends to be larger and the acreage subject to the affordable housing tends to be smaller.
I don't understand what the 1.5% is for. It says zone.
It's an alternative to the 10%. Either one would be a long-term safe harbor that the town could use to deny chapter 40B developments.
So less than 10% of year-round housing, what,
So that means if you look at the total number of year-round housing units, and DHCD publishes something that's known as the subsidized housing inventory, and that will actually let you know where your town is in terms of that 10%, and I can look it up.
I don't think we have that much.
No, I think we're, Alicia, could you
seasonal.
jump in? Alicia, I think we're at what, 8%, 8 something?
We're actually dropping, we're at 7.5 or 7.6 right now because we've
Okay.
lost a couple units.
7.6% of our housing is not year-round. Is that what I understand?
No, you have to have 10% of your year-round housing units subject to an affordable housing restriction.
Okay, I understand
If
it
you
now.
don't meet that, then you don't meet this safe harbor requirement.
Okay, I got it now.
Then you then look at whether you could perhaps meet the 1.5% say general land area minimum. But again, Ayer is far enough away from Boston that this is probably something that wouldn't be.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm very confused. How can a municipality possibly have less than 1.5% of total land area for anything but residential, commercial, industrial? What's left?
yeah, so-
Farm?
So this is sort of not as a good overview in terms of that. It's really just a talking point. So it's that 1.5% of your total land area zone for residential, commercial, or industrial use is restricted for affordable housing.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, okay.
And so again, this is a provision that a lot of the inner suburbs are trying to push, but have not really been very successful. I'm aware of only one successful 1.5% claim in the last 5+ years. DHCD just issued I'm sorry, not DHCD, the Housing Appeals Committee just issued a decision yesterday in Weston denying a 1.5% safe harbor claim. So then the third regulatory safe harbor is the total land area safe harbor. It's 0.3%. I literally have never seen this applied ever anywhere. I don't know how it works. I don't know that anybody really does know mechanically how it works. It's just something that's never been applied. So there are also regulatory safe harbors. If the town has a housing production plan, then you could apply for a certification towards that plan if you do 0.5% of your total year-round housing stock in a calendar year. You would get a 1-year safe harbor, and if you did 1%, you would get a 2-year safe harbor. Recent progress is similar to the housing production plan, except for it doesn't require the plan. If you do and it's a 1-year look back from when you receive an application. And if you do 2% of your, again, total year-round housing units restricted as affordable in the 12 months prior to receiving a comprehensive permit application, then you would get a 1-year safe harbor. There is a large project safe harbor, and it's based upon the community size. I haven't looked to see where Ayer fits into that. It's 150 units based upon more than, I think, 2,500 year-round housing units. It's 200 units if it's more than 5,000 year-round housing units, and so on. And then there's
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What constitutes a safe harbor? What does that insinuate?
The safe harbor means that if the board can claim a safe harbor, and there's a procedure that we will go through next, but if the board is eligible for any of these safe harbors and it follows the procedure and claims it, within the required time frame, any decision you make is automatically determined to be consistent with local needs. So if you would deny,
I'm trying to understand the term safe harbor, regulatory safe harbor. What is
Can I jump in?
it protects whom?
it protects the board.
Ah,
So any decision that the board would issue when it has this safe harbor protection would automatically be upheld if there were an appeal.
okay.
Mr.
you.
Haverty?
Yes.
I'm not sure that everybody on here understands what a state comprehensive permit is, the 40B. I mean, just what it is. It is,
Sure.
The definition of that, that might help.
Sure. So a comprehensive permit, Chapter 40B is a law that was adopted in 1969 to help foster the creation of affordable housing. And one of the ways that it does it is it allows for a one-stop shopping process where an applicant can go to the local Board of Appeals and get all local permits as part of one hearing, one application process. So if you have requirements, for a local wetlands bylaw, for a local Board of Health rules and regulations, planning board regulations, any special permit requirements, any of that is all subsumed into this one single application process. It also gives a developer the ability to request waivers of local rules and regulations. So it doesn't allow them to request waivers of state requirements, even if they're being applied by a local board. So for instance, the Conservation Commission issues orders of conditions under the State Wetlands Protection Act. That is actually a state permit that's being issued by a local board. It is not subject to Chapter 40B. It's not subsumed in the comprehensive permit process. But the order of condition, the Conservation Commission will also frequently issue orders of conditions under a local wetlands bylaw that would be more stringent than the Wetlands Protection Act. That permitting process is subsumed under the 40B process. And again, it's the same with local Board of Health Title V regulations, earth removal requirements, anything of that nature that is a local permitting decision is all part of your process under Chapter 40B.
So all of the subsequent review boards, wetlands or planning or all that, it all goes to the ZBA now under this rule, under this law.
Yeah, under a single application, correct.
Do they take, well, I imagine you're going to get into it in a little bit, but I'm just trying to get my hands around it. Are we taking information from the other boards, or are we trying to make how
Yes.
does it function? You'll probably explain
So-
that, right?
And again, we cover it later, but it's better to just answer the questions as they're asked.
Okay.
So you will distribute copies of the application to whatever local boards should appropriately receive it, and that includes Planning Board, Board of Health, Conservation Commission, Select Board, Police, Fire, anyone else that would generally weigh in on some kind of a development process. You would take input from them during the course of the hearing process. Hopefully, they're receptive to actually providing suggested conditions to the board, suggested waiver decisions, but ultimately it's going to be the board that makes the determination, whether to impose those conditions, whether to grant the waivers. It's all going to be part of your process. The other boards will simply have an advisory role during this process.
Good. Thank you.
And sometimes they choose not to. Sometimes other local boards are happy to let the Board of Appeals sort of take the brunt of the 40B application and not provide any feedback because they don't want to acknowledge, the limitations that are inherent in Chapter 40B, which we will get into. And sometimes they're very, very diligent about providing input to the board, and sometimes reasonably and sometimes not reasonably. And again, that's going to have to be part of your process in weighing this application.
Okay.
So when you do get a Chapter 40B application, there are certain critical submission requirements. You need to determine whether the applicant is a public agency, a nonprofit, or a limited dividend organization. Generally, it's going to be a limited dividend organization. And the way they establish that they're a limited dividend organization is basically they commit to being one. And that's part of the project eligibility process. Evidence of site control, again, is part of the project eligibility process. It's a determination that the subsidizing agency has to make as part of their process. And then the project eligibility letter itself is something that should be part of the application process to the board.
Sorry, Mr. Haverty, could you I didn't understand the limited dividend organization. Who would this be?
It would be the applicant. So the way Chapter 40B works, you have to be either a public agency, like if Housing Authority
Right.
came in and wanted to do a development, they would be a public agency. Or you can be a nonprofit entity, and there are plenty of those out there developing affordable housing. But for the most part, you see applications from limited dividend organizations. And how do we establish?
What is it? I don't even know what it is. What is one?
So the way you establish yourself as a limited dividend organization is you agree to abide by the terms of the subsidizing agency with
Okay.
regards to the profit that you can take out of a 40B development.
Okay, thank you.
And it depends on whether it's a rental project or an ownership project, what the terms are in terms of what you're allowed to take.
That makes sense. What kind of evidence of site control would they need?
So it generally will be a deed or a purchase and sale agreement, an option
Oh, okay,
along those lines.
okay.
But again, that is something that is determined as part of the process with the subsidizing agency. So the board has limited ability to look into that issue. There's the determination by the subsidizing agency is deemed conclusive unless there has been a change to the status of the site control subsequent to the subsidizing agency making their determination.
Thank you.
So other 40B application submission requirements, preliminary plans versus final plans. So this is something that can be difficult for a board to wrap its mind around, and it can be something of a moving target as well. But under Chapter 40B, an applicant is not required to submit final design plans. They're not required to submit detail to the level that might be submitted for site plan review by a planning board. They're only required to submit conceptual plans. I think that it's very, very common through the course of the proceeding to get those plans firmed up much more significantly than when they arrive. And you get closer to a final stage of a plan before you issue a decision. But at the end of the day, you're not going to have a final set of plans to issue a decision. You're going to have to issue a decision on preliminary plans, and your decision will have to include a requirement that they submit final plans for review by the board to ensure that those final plans are consistent with your decision and all the conditions contained therein before they're allowed to get a building permit. So the preliminary plans, should include existing site conditions and a locus map, preliminary scaled architectural drawings. There's a requirement in the regulations that they include tabulation of proposed buildings by type, size, and ground coverage. I'm not sure why it's there. I don't really know how helpful it is. There's a requirement that if they are asking for a subdivision, that they include a preliminary subdivision plan. They have to include a preliminary utilities plan, and they have to include a list of waivers. So the list of waivers is something that can be a bit of a sticking point in a process. My advice to boards is to not grant blanket waivers of local rules and requirements, to require an applicant to provide significant detail with all of the waiver requests that they're making. And that's to protect both the board and the applicant. Because if the board issues a decision that grants waivers of local rules and regulations, then it can't point to knowing exactly what the nature of those waivers are. I mean, that's almost per se an arbitrary and capricious decision.
Yeah.
So I always, and almost always, you're going to get a preliminary list of waivers that's not sufficient. And I'm going to have to tell the applicant, you need to make these much more specific. The board is going to need to know exactly which provisions of which bylaws you want waived and what you propose to do instead of complying. So if you've got a 20-foot side yard setback requirement, then I want to know what is the smallest setback that you are proposing. Not just I want a waiver of the 20-foot setback requirement. I need to know exactly how close you're getting. All right, so there's a number of deadlines, some hard and fast and some a little more loosey-goosey that the board needs to be aware of. So again, as I discussed earlier, you're going to want to distribute the application that says within 7 days of receipt. That's not a hard and fast requirement. Nothing is going to happen if you don't distribute the application until 8 days or 20 days or 40 days. But the sooner you get it to other boards, the sooner you get feedback from those boards. So it's certainly better
Well,
to get it within 7 days.
I'm looking at this schedule
Yep.
and 7 days, 14 days, within 30 days, 15 days, 15 days. We meet once a month.
Mhm.
Not anymore.
So,
Uh,
so the 14 days notice, you have to, this is a hard and fast requirement, okay? Once you get this comprehensive permit application, you need to make sure you're doing your required notice for the public hearing within 14 days to give you the 2-week period that you need to hold your properly noticed public hearing within 30 days of the receipt of the application. If you don't hold your initial public hearing within 30 days, that is grounds for a constructive approval. So that is, these two are very important deadlines that you're going to want to make sure you comply with. Once the public hearing is opened, then you have 15 days to notify the applicants of any safe harbor that the board believes is applicable. And so this is what we were discussing earlier. This is the process that the board has to follow if it believes it has a safe harbor. If the board provides notification to the applicant that it believes it has a safe harbor that is applicable to it, it also has to include evidence supporting that claim. Then the applicant has 15 days to file an appeal to DHCD. DHCD has 30 days to provide an answer. And what this doesn't say is then there is a 20-day appeal period to the Housing Appeals Committee. And the Housing Appeals Committee will then take several months, and the hearing will be stayed to allow this process to occur. But they'll take several months to determine whether or not the safe harbor claim is valid or not valid. There's
Are these calendar days or business days?
calendar days.
Right.
And so then, I mean, I've seen them take over a year on a safe harbor claim. But once they do make their determination, there's no immediate right to take a Superior Court appeal. It's the matters remanded back to the board and you re-engage in the hearing process. Once the public hearing is open, presuming that there's no stay because of a safe harbor issue, the board has 180 days to complete its public hearing. It's not unusual for the time period to go longer than 180 days. Frequently because an applicant just doesn't have their act together and they continually request continuations. If the board is asked to continue a hearing by the applicants, I would generally advise the board to request that they extend the 180-day deadline period. Because if you're wasting 30 days without a hearing, you need that extra 30 days at the end because that
Right.
180-day period is going to go quickly. Once the board does close its public hearing, it has 40 days to issue its decision. And then once the board issues its decision, there's a 20-day appeal period. So we'll go back to this, and there is something later, but let's talk about the appeal period now. So if an applicant believes it's aggrieved by the board's decision, either because of a denial or an approval with conditions that the applicant believes renders the project uneconomic, they have an appeal right directly to the Housing Appeals Committee. The Housing Appeals Committee is a state agency. It's within the auspices of DHCD. And all they do is hear appeals of Board of Appeals decisions on comprehensive permit applications. They are, by statute, an entity that is predisposed to ruling in favor of applicants because that's their purpose. They are designed to help facilitate the creation of affordable housing. There's also an appeal right for abutters or anyone else that perceives that they are aggrieved by the board's decision, but that goes either to Superior Court or to Land Court. And you may have a circumstance where there are dual appeals filed, where a developer files an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee and a neighbor files an appeal to the Superior Court. And then what happens is the Superior Court appeal is automatically stayed until the HAC determination is made. And if the HAC overturns the board's decision, then the Superior Court appeal is ruled moot. So I presume that the board has a process where it engages in site visits, at least on some developments.
No,
No, you don't do site visits?
no, we don't, we're a board of appeals. No, I
Okay, like
mean,
special permit applications where you'll go and visit a site as a board? No?
Most of our special permits are issued by the planning board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so there's no requirement that you conduct a site visit. It can be very helpful. It helps you to understand the site, the neighborhood conditions, the existing conditions, the site plan and the proposed building design. Helps you identify the abutters in terms of which ones will be most impacted. There is a requirement. You got to make sure you follow the open meeting law. A site visit is exempt from certain open meeting law requirements, but the board can't engage in deliberation. You can really only take directional. The applicant can inform you, this is where the edge of the proposed buildings have been staked. This is where the roadway will be. This is how high the building will be. They may do a balloon test or something of that nature. This is where we propose screening to block off visually the building from the neighbors. But you can't make any sort of determinations as part of that process. You can't engage in side conversations with neighbors or with the applicant during that process. One thing that you are going to want to do very, very early in the process is retain peer review consultants. I'm going to guess that then the board is not familiar with this process if you're not generally hearing special permit type hearings.
No.
You have larger projects. So under chapter 44, section 30, yeah, I forget now exactly the site, but there is a provision that allows a town to accept funding from an applicant to engage outside consultants. And those outside consultants would generally be for civil engineering, for traffic, for architecture. And then this last one, financial peer review, that's actually subject to very stringent requirements under the HAC regulations. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So the requirements for peer review is that the peer review consultant can only review studies that have been prepared on the behalf of the applicants. They're not allowed to use peer review funds to prepare independent studies. But it's very important that the board engage the peer review consultants, do it very early in the process, because that is sort of the expertise that the board gets to rely upon.
so we're actually receiving money from the applicant,
And you're retaining the peer review
And
consultant
retaining-
yourself.
another civil engineer, for example, to review what their civil engineer did. Is that
Correct.
why I understand it?
Yep.
Okay. Thank
Yep.
you.
So they're only allowed to review the studies that they prepare. They can't just go on and say, well, we're going to do this study because we think that the applicant should have done that. They can certainly point out deficiencies in a study prepared by the applicant and request that they provide additional information, do another study, something of that nature.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Haverty?
Of course.
I wanted to give the example of a traffic study. Let's say the applicant comes in and they do not want to perform a traffic study, but the Board of Appeals thinks and the town believes that the traffic study is required.
Mhm.
Does the board have enough strength to insist that a traffic study be completed and then hire a peer reviewer to, review that traffic study, which has already been paid for by the applicant?
Yes.
Okay,
Essentially what the board would do, if the applicant is refusing to provide funds for a peer review consultant, then, and is refusing to provide evidence of a key issue regarding a development, simply inform the applicant that the board will not have sufficient information to make its decision, and therefore it's going to deny the application. And that puts all of the risk on the applicant in an appeal, because the board does have the right to this information as part of the process.
If circumstantially, if that did happen and we inform the applicant that we're going to deny it, he obviously has an appeal process. Does the clock start running on an appeal at that point?
Yes. So, I mean, they don't have the right to appeal until the board issues a decision denying the application. But if the applicant is telling the board, I'm not going to provide you information that the board has the right to obtain, then the board, it certainly is within its rights to deny for lack of information.
You know, what is the appeal
I have not run
process?
into this. My experience is that as long as the request is a reasonable request and it's something that is generally considered to be the sort of information that is developed in the comprehensive permit process, the applicant is going to agree to provide the information and is going to agree to fund the peer review. There are only a couple of ways in which an applicant can challenge a peer review consultant that's been retained by the board. First is for lack of expertise in a particular subject matter. And the second is if there's a conflict of interest. Other than that, the board is free to retain whoever it chooses for the peer review. The regulations do indicate that the board should keep the cost in mind and limit the scope of the peer review only to those issues that are necessary to be reviewed as part of the process. All right, securing sufficient project information to make an informed decision. So this section is really intended to get the boards to look at what it really should be keying on during its process. So focus on the real project issues, impacts early in the review process, which is what you will be doing by engaging the peer review process. Again, request additional information from the applicants. That's going to happen. We are going to need to request additional information. I've never seen a comprehensive permit project in which the applicant has submitted every piece of relevant information as part of their initial submittal. Don't hesitate to ask for graphics that help clarify height, massing, setbacks, and overall relationship to the neighbors. I don't know if that's going to be an issue in the development that's proposed or not, but it's certainly something, within the board's rights.
That brings an interesting question to mind. If you back up for a minute.
Yep.
We were to focus on the real project issues and impacts early in the review process, but all we have is preliminary information. Well, how would you determine the real project issues if you're looking at a conceptual drawing or preliminary sketches?
Well, I mean, I think that if you have a concern with how they're able to handle septic on the site, if you believe that the soils are not sufficient, if you think that there are significant traffic issues in that area, those are things that you can probably determine right off the bat from their submittal. I mean, if they've got a very tight site and are barely able to handle septic and stormwater on the site based on their preliminary plans, then you know that you're going to need additional information and you should be focusing on that issue right off the bat.
Okay, thank you.
Negotiation and work sessions, this is something that boards are allowed to do. Some boards like to use this process. Some boards don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So a work session is, again, something that is outside of the strict requirements of the open meeting law in the sense that it's not a hearing, it's not formally noticed. You can't have a quorum of the board members participate in a work session. My recommendation is to not have more than one member participate in a work session because you can't have a deliberation with more than one person. Neighbors can be invited to these sessions. They're not necessarily required to be. All discussions are advisory in nature, so you can't come to any sort of agreement with a developer during a work session. You can't make any final decisions, and you're required to actually report back the substance of any discussions during that session to the full board at the next regularly scheduled hearing.
What do you mean by negotiating with developers? Negotiating what?
So again, this is probably not an appropriate word there. It's real, the work sessions are really designed to work through technical issues.
Okay,
It frequently they're used with the peer review consultants and the developers engineers present, and you're allowed therefore to actually get a good sense as to where the differences are, which can sometimes be difficult in an open meeting setting, because you're getting all kinds of comments from neighbors, and it can be hard to focus on the areas of dispute just between the peer review consultants. So the best use of these work sessions is really just to address technical issues.
because I see this where it says negotiating with,
Yeah, and so
that's a
this
give and
PowerPoint
take.
comes from a canned presentation through MHP. I don't think negotiation is really appropriate.
That, I agree with you. Okay,
All right, so when the board's issuing its decision, these are the standards that it needs to look at. It needs to balance regional housing needs, and what that means is the regional need for affordable housing with issues of local concern. And the issues of local concern are broken down into health, safety, environmental, design, open space, planning, or other legitimate issues of local concern. I will tell you, health and safety are the two measures where boards have had success in upholding either denials or approvals with condition. Environmental, I don't know of too many cases in which a board has successfully upheld a denial or an approval with condition. I don't know of any design cases where that's been the case. Open space, again, I'm not aware of any HAC cases where open space has been a legitimate issue of local concern. I can see that occurring if you've got a site that has been previously identified as a priority acquisition for open space by the town. But barring that, I don't think that that is generally a fruitful area for a town to focus on. Planning is an occasionally successful defense for a denial or approval with conditions. For the most part, it hasn't been successful, but where there's a specific area of a town that has been the subject of a well-conceived comprehensive zoning plan, and the town is also able to show how it has encouraged the development of affordable housing in other areas of the town, then it has been a successful approach, and the HAC has a three-part test that they use to implement. But the successful cases have really gone to, if there is a commercial or industrial section of the town that the town has identified a very coherent and specific plan for the development of that area, those are the circumstances where the planning concerns have been upheld, but otherwise they've been unsuccessful.
okay.
So holding deliberation sessions, again, we discussed this earlier. The board has 180 days to conduct an open hearing process, at which point it's required to close its public hearing, and then the board is allowed to deliberate on the application. I actually would recommend the board, if it is able to, during the comprehensive hearing process, to do its deliberation while the hearing is still open. You're much more limited once the hearing has been closed. You really can't take any additional input from the developer. You can't take additional input from the neighbors once you've closed the public hearing. So I would certainly want to get to at least a draft decision and have received some some input from the applicant and from the public before you close the public hearing, if we're able to get to that stage. And again, it really depends on how the process plays out. So in terms of drafting and issuing a comprehensive permit decision, the board has three alternatives. One is denial, One is approve as submitted, which I have never seen happen and won't happen in this case. And the third is approval with conditions. Approval with conditions, again, is the least risky decision for the board to issue. First of all, it places an additional level of proof on an applicant in an appeal. If the board denies a comprehensive permit application and an applicant appeals it to the Housing Appeals Committee, the process goes directly to the board having the burden of establishing an issue of local concern that outweighs the need for regional need for affordable housing, sorry. If the board approves it with conditions, then the applicant is, in the first instance, required to show that those conditions render the project uneconomic. All right, so when we get to the approval with conditions, the conditions should not render the project uneconomic. The only caveat that I would add to that is if the board identifies something that it determines is a legitimate issue of local concern, then it really shouldn't be too concerned about whether it renders the project uneconomic. So if there is let's just say that the board issues a condition requiring the reduction in impervious surface in the project because the information from the board's peer review consultant indicates that the applicant can't comply with state stormwater management standards with the project as designed. And therefore, the board wants to impose a condition that requires a reduction in the impervious area. I think that that's an appropriate condition that the board should include and shouldn't care that it renders the project uneconomic because you've identified a legitimate issue of local concern that outweighs the regional need for affordable housing. What you can't do in this process is actually try to get the developer to reduce the number of units, not in a manner that's not tied to issues of local concern. So in the regulations, there is a provision that states that any condition that the board imposes has to be tied to a legitimate issue of local concern. You can't simply reduce the number of units because you think it would still be an economic project. The applicant could essentially avoid the uneconomic process with HAC and go directly to the issue of consistency with local needs if it's able to show that the board reduced the number of units for issues not related to local needs. And again, so we discussed appeals of the board's decision, go to the Housing Appeals Committee if by the applicants, Superior Court or the Land Court by the aggrieved parties. So once a board issues a comprehensive permit, you're still not done with the process. Go back one here. So as we noted before, the process is based upon preliminary plans. So they're going to have to submit final plans for the board's review to ensure that what they're actually going to be building upon is consistent with the decision that you issued. They also have to go back to the subsidizing agency and get final approval, right? And in that process, they have to execute a regulatory agreement, deed riders, monitoring service agreements. They've got to provide an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. They've got to engage a lottery agent, and they've got to show that they're going through that lottery process to establish that either the renters or the buyers qualify in terms of the income, assets, first-time buyer status, all of that stuff. So there's still, a decent process that occurs even after the comprehensive permit is issued. The board is allowed to include a condition in its permit that the permit shall lapse after a period of not less than 3 years, unless substantial construction has commenced. And that's generally shown by the issuance of a building permit. But the one thing that isn't covered in here that I should go over, you're never really done with a comprehensive permit either. Even years later, an applicant can come back to a board and request modifications of a comprehensive permit, and that's under 760 CMR 56.0511. And as long as they're able to show that the permit as approved is not an economic permit, and that however they're proposing to modify that permit would be significantly less uneconomic, they're able to get that modification approved, sort of under the same standards as their original application. So I've been involved in permit processes where they've come back for modifications, 10 years after the initial submittal.
And we had one not too long ago for this board for the Willows. It was probably
Right.
3 or 4 years ago, if everyone remembers, but
Yep.
they wanted a modification. I don't remember what it was about at this moment, but we have done one before, but the project was maybe like 15 years old at that point.
And wasn't it the water, retaining water or something like that, the
Yeah,
pond?
there's something with water, yeah.
Okay, so the interesting thing is, if the project's already been constructed, then the board is on pretty firm setting to state that modifications wouldn't be allowed, because if it's already been sold or if it's already been rented and it's already being shown to be economic as constructed, then how are they going to be able to show that the denial of the modification renders the project uneconomic? It's really only applicable when the applicant hasn't either completed construction or even commenced construction. But again, that process, the commencement of construction process can take many years. Although there is a 3-year lapse permit period, there's also ways to have that extended. And the regulations specifically state that a request for a lapse shall be treated as a request for a modification. A request for the extension of the lapse period is treated as a request for a modification and shall not be unreasonably denied. So it's almost impossible to deny a request for an extension of the lapse period. So you could wind up, I've seen applications where you've had 3 or 4 extensions of a lapse period and 10 years go by before they actually commence construction. At which point, they could come in and request a modification and get a project significantly different than what was originally approved. So that's just something you have to keep in mind throughout the process. When an applicant makes a commitment to say, well, we're committing to doing this, and that's the final say, it's not necessarily accurate, because they can always come in and request a post-permit modification.
Who is this? I looked at the, looking at your management, go ahead back. Who is this monitoring agreement with? And what's
It's
it
done through
for?
the subsidizing agency. It's part of the final approval process. So there's an outside agency. It's generally the subsidizing agency itself for a rental development. And there are independent agencies. Local housing authorities will frequently act as a monitoring agent. CHAPA used to do a lot of monitoring of 40B developments.
We wouldn't have nothing to do with this, would we?
Well, you would not act as a monitoring agent, no. But the question becomes, if they're not complying with monitoring requirements, would this somehow come back to you for a determination that they are out of compliance with your permit? Possibly.
How would we know?
It would have to be brought to your attention. Yeah. Which
They do submit
comes up.
like reports from time to time, like CHAPA. I think CHAPA monitors the Willows, and I think like once a year or twice a year, like I'll get a letter and forward it off saying that they're in compliance or whatever. And then if a unit changes and it's not affordable anymore, they have to like notify us. But sometimes it's just a quick letter in the mail that we get.
Okay.
So that's the presentation. I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
I have a
May I have a
question.
question?
Sure.
Oh, go ahead, Ken.
Mr. Haverty, at
Yes.
the very beginning in the application process, there's a chance that someone could come in with an application or try to make an attempt for a 40B that's unqualified. They don't have experience, and they, have a concept plan. They kind of just throwing an idea out there. Do you run into that? And what kind of effort can the town be aware of to make sure that an applicant is a bona fide applicant and qualified before we expend any time even considering their effort to, put in a 40B.
So unfortunately, that process is part of the project eligibility process.
Okay,
So the subsidizing agency will, that is one of their criteria. They will make a determination as to whether or not the applicant and its entity has the requisite experience to do this type of a development.
but the town could expect then some kind of document at the very beginning that they've gone through that process and that they are
Well, you-
qualified.
They
can
go
request
through, the findings that they're required to make as part of the project eligibility letter, yes.
They would have to have a letter of eligibility before they even came before us.
Correct.
All right.
But the problem for the town is if you disagree with it, there is no appeal right to a project eligibility letter. And it's presumed to have been properly issued.
Thank you.
Jonathan, you're muted.
Muted.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Mr. Harvey, I have a question.
Sure.
I know this reaches back earlier when you were just before you talked extensively about safe harbor. You made the distinction between local officials enforcing state regulations versus imposing their own bylaws or community-based regulations. And what I want to be clear with is, if we have the safe harbor, can we impose the local? Is that the difference? Or in any circumstance with a comprehensive permit, the local regulations go to the wayside, but the state regulations remain enforceable?
So the first issue is your local requirements are still applicable.
Okay.
A comprehensive permit. They are allowed to request waivers of local rules and requirements. Okay. And again, I don't recommend the board grant blanket waivers of any requirements. They don't have to go through the application process. That's all part of the 40B application process. But if they want to wait, so if you've got a local wetlands bylaw that has, a 50-foot no touch,
right?
Then if they want to do work within that 50-foot, they have to request a waiver. And they've got to tell the board, all right, we're going to seek a waiver of the 50-foot requirement, and we're going to do work as close as 35 feet. And then it's up to the board whether or not to grant that waiver. And if the board does not benefit from a safe harbor, then you're really constrained to show an issue of local concern that would uphold the denial of that waiver. And simply stating, well, it's a local requirement and we think it's important, isn't enough.
Could I
That
ask,
wouldn't that primarily be predicated on feedback from wetlands or from conservation?
Well, you may get feedback from conservation that says, don't waive any of our local requirements.
could I ask a related?
And there is case law on that. And it basically says, no, you need to provide specific reasons as to why in this specific area, a waiver of this requirement is consistent with local needs.
So I have a question related to that, which is, so if there was a request to waive a 50-foot no disturb, which Ayer does have now, that waiver is granted by the zoning board, not the Conservation Commission?
Correct. The
Okay.
Zoning Board of Appeals is the Conservation Commission as it relates to the local bylaw for a
Okay,
comprehensive.
and does it matter if a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals is also on the Conservation Commission? Is that a conflict of interest in any way?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Mr. Haverty, I
Yes.
believe what you said earlier, that if you do willing to accept the request for a waiver, that you could insist on, well, what would you do? For instance, in the example of the 50-foot, the ZBA has the right to say to them, well, okay, but where?
Correct. And how close?
All
So
feet?
if you're seeking a waiver of the 50-foot no touch, how close do you intend to get to the wetland?
Just another slight question. You just said that the ZBA would effectively be the Conservation Commission in determining a waiver.
Yep.
Would,
Not only that, just in acting on the local bylaw. So they would also again, post-permit, they would be the enforcing agency.
Yeah,
The any portion of the local bylaw that is still applicable, if there was a claim that they weren't in compliance, an enforcement action would have to come from the Board of Appeals, not the
Oh.
Conservation Commission.
and does an applicant still have to go before, say, the Conservation Commission separately with an order of condition, a notice of intent under the state's wetland protection? Act?
Yes, yeah, so the Conservation Commission retains all of its jurisdiction under the Wetland Protection Act, just like the Board of Health retains all of its jurisdiction under Title V. The building commissioner retains all of his jurisdiction under the state building code. It's only the truly local requirements, things that were adopted and passed locally.
Okay, and that's through the zoning board then?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Haverty, can the zoning board of appeals assign an agent as their representative to enforce the regulations in the event the project is ongoing and they're incapable of, making site visits or whatever the case might be?
Yes, it can.
Okay,
And quite frequently, that would be the conservation agent.
okay, good. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? I know that you said in the beginning that several agencies will provide technical assistance to the board. Does that include the deadlines? Like, you were saying how important those deadlines were at first. There's someone like DHC or DHCD would assign to this kind of with us to go through the process. Is that correct? Or do we hire a
aware of it.
consultant?
You
Okay.
got me.
Okay. Well, so what is the technical assistance that they offer?
So the technical assistance is the assistance throughout the hearing process. So I will be present at every Board of Appeals hearing to assist the board in how the meeting is run.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
okay.
absolutely with regards to compliance with the deadlines, I'll make you aware of them. I will answer any questions you have with regards to the notice
Okay.
and any of that sort of stuff.
That makes me feel better. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anything else?
I have to ask something that I know this is painfully obvious to everyone else, but I imagine that the comprehensive permit just pretty much obliterates our open space residential development regulations. Is that true or?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, so I haven't looked at your zoning bylaw yet, and I don't know if the open space residential development is a separate process. But if it is, they're not even applying under it.
Yeah, I got.
So they
Mark-
wouldn't even
Mark
need to
Marshall
request
here.
waivers of it.
Hello, if I could just make a point to Jonathan's question. I don't think it would really be applicable because it would be more of a site plan rather than a subdivision.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I assumed that was true. I just wanted to be sure.
Right, but normally they would still need to meet all the other open space requirements and that are in the
Oh,
bylaw and
do they?
regulation.
I don't know. That's a good question, Mark.
Yeah.
For Mr. Haverty, if we have a minimum requirement on a site that we maintain 50% open space, which I think is kind of a minimum on almost anything that's new, they would ask for a waiver to that.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to see how much impervious they're proposing, but yeah. We'll take a close look at that.
Yeah.
And again, the standard is whether or not that open space requirement is an issue of local concern that outweighs the regional need for affordable housing.
Mr. Haverty, you just raised an important point. I noticed the language is regional housing versus local regulation. So that kind of confuses me. So what if you're
Confuses everybody.
surrounded by wealthier towns that have, snob zoning, for example, so they're low on the affordable. And so the region has a need for this housing, but we're making our 10%, et cetera. How does that affect the applicability of our local law? You know what I'm
So
saying?
once you're over the 10%, you're in the safe harbor.
Okay.
And the regional need for affordable housing is established by the fact that you have met your 10%.
Oh, I get it. Okay. Got it.
Any other questions? Okay.
Do I hear any questions? I hear crickets.
I missed the first 15 minutes because I lost my Comcast connection completely.
All right, I'll start all over.
I'm sorry, Jess.
I don't see any hands raised on the side, Sam, either, so.
No. I'll take a run through the ZBA real quick. John Ellis? Questions?
I don't have any specific questions at this point because we need to, there's really nothing we can do till we get an application in our hands and come up with a game plan as how we're going to approach this. My concern was, I read this big article in the paper how another town close to us had this application in front of them, and the meeting went on for 3 hours right up front, just talking about driveway space and all the little minutia. Now, are we going to have to go through the minutia with a fine-tooth comb, or we're just going to say, this is already in the bylaw and we're sticking with the bylaws and we're not going to get into all that?
I think we will get into it. I think we will be looking at different aspects. I think we'll be taking comments from the other departments and other divisions, and then we will respond in kind. I think
Right.
that's the way it would work.
Yeah, so simply relying upon the fact that you have a bylaw and it does not comply with the bylaw is not going to be a valid basis for a decision. You're going to have to identify why that particular provision is so important that it outweighs the regional need for affordable housing.
Yep.
So some of those technical difficulties that you were just mentioning, John, are those the sorts of things that could be sort of addressed in a work session that you described earlier?
That certainly would. I mean, when you're talking about a long list of real minutia,
yeah,
that is absolutely the sort of thing that could be worked out in a work session instead.
All set, John?
Yeah, well, we'll just have to come up with a schedule for all that stuff because monthly meetings isn't going to get it done.
That's a fact. That is a fact. Carly's going to be very busy. Mike, Mr. Gibbons.
So first, Mr. Haverty, thank you for this presentation. I think it was very helpful for me. And if you take a look, we've got 19 participants, which since COVID started, I think is the most participants we've had in a meeting. Which I think points to another, another thing that we should observe is that when an application does come in, this is obviously going to be something that's going to be discussed at length. I think relying on Mr. Haverty, Robert, Carly, Mark is going to be important for us because I've never seen this, and I might be the longest. Oh, well, Ron may have with the Willows, but this is going to be new for us. So I think working with, Mr. Haverty, town staff, and then, our colleagues on the planning board, conservation commission is going to be important. I think, we talked a little bit about those working sessions. From what I can tell with 40B, and again, this is my first time dealing with one personally, I think the working sessions are going to be important. Frankly, I think most of the concern we're going to see is going to come from abutters, where any appeal is going to be heard by a sub-agency of the DHCD, which starts this process anyways. We can, if we deny something, I don't see us winning in a court of appeals all that often, unless we have an incredibly valid reason and, maybe we could work something out in a working session. So my main point is that, this is going to be a lengthy, probably controversial project that we're all just going to have to work through.
Thank you. Jess?
Yeah, and I'm just trying to balance being ZBA and then being conservation. Again, just to reiterate, say, a notice of intent to the Conservation Commission under the Wetland Protection Act could not deny a whole project. It could just try to impose conditions on jurisdictional land under the Wetlands Protection Act. And the local wetlands bylaw would not apply unless the ZBA weighed in on that.
So again, the
Yeah.
local wetlands bylaw applies. It
And
is
unless
it's still
waived.
in place. It is not automatically waived, although you will hear developers claim otherwise.
Yeah,
You will have them ask for a waiver of the entire bylaw. The board will not grant a waiver of an entire bylaw.
Yeah.
They're going to have to specify exactly which provisions that they can't comply with.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Ron?
Further questions, I'd just like to make a comment that having gone through some of this with the previous developer, you can just pray for having a good developer. I don't recall any great agonizing moments with the last one. The developer cooperated. I mean, there's no guarantee that we're going to have such an easy relationship, but you know, it can be good. That's all I can say. We'll wait and see and try to keep up with this thing the best we can. And but I don't think it's a real onerous task. I mean, it's daunting. There's plenty of deadline triggers and things like that. You've got to be careful. But if all the boards cooperate, a lot of our technical work will be done, and that's a good thing. So if everybody gets into this, that's
There
what I have to
is
say.
there is a significant incentive for the applicants to avoid having to appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee. That process takes at least 2 years, in my experience, and is expensive. So a good developer is going to recognize that working with the town to try to get to a mutually agreeable decision is the best approach.
Yes.
Of course, they're not all good developers, so you just have to wait and see.
What's the best way for the ZBA to work with to communicate with other boards during this process? Through written feedback from other boards or having other boards present at a ZBA hearing?
I think it's helpful to have at least, chairs or a designated member of other boards appear in front of the board to provide the feedback orally during a meeting. But barring that, detailed written communications are also very helpful.
That written communication would probably substantiate a denial in a courtroom, wouldn't it?
No,
If need be? No?
no. Again, conservation commissions very frequently recommend against granting waivers of their local bylaws. But that in itself isn't enough. There needs to be very definitive evidence to show the harm that would be caused by the grant of the waiver. And simply stating our bylaw prohibits it for a reason isn't enough. So you really need, having a testimony of a Conservation Commission member on a conservation issue will be important in an appeal, but having technical input, from your peer review consultants or outside engineer, wetland scientist, something of that nature is more important in that process. You need the expert testimony.
Okay.
I have one more question, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Mr. Haverty, is there ever an instance where off-site improvements can be requested as part of the issuance of the permit? For instance, if it's in an area where there's a potential for an improvement to sidewalks or a potential to, some particular piece of the town property or in general, off-site improvements, that would be a benefit to the project, number one, because it might make the project better connectivity and things like that. What kind of leeway have you seen in that particular situation?
There is some leeway. With regard to sidewalks, it's an interesting question. It probably goes to whether or not you can identify a safety concern if there are sidewalks that aren't included. With regards to things like water, sewer, other municipal infrastructure, there's HAC decisional law that states that you can require the applicant to fund at least their reasonable fair share of the need for the improvement. So you can't require, them to put in a new wastewater treatment facility.
You can't pay for the PFAS treatment plant.
Right. However, you might be able to get them to include a contribution, based upon the way they're contributing to that problem.
Okay.
But I'll also, you never know until you ask anyway. With regard to the sidewalks, it's not uncommon to see a developer agree to put sidewalks in.
Okay. Any other questions? I guess not. Well, Mr. Haverty, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to working with you once the application is filed.
Once it is filed. All right.
Well,
Thank
there's not
you.
really much to do until then, right?
That's right. That's absolutely right. All right. Well, thank you very much. I
All right,
appreciate
thanks,
it.
everyone. Night.
Good night. Okay. Any questions from any board members?
No?
All right. Well, that ended the Chapter 40B comprehensive permit training. So that being said, we've already approved the meeting minutes. Before I take a motion to adjourn, Carly, do we have anything on schedule for next month?
No, not yet.
All right.
And I haven't heard of anything, but they have until technically Monday to submit. So I'll keep you posted.
All right. Thank you.
And Sam, just as an aside, if we do have a meeting next month, there's a good chance I won't be there because my daughter is due about a week before that scheduled date. So I probably won't be on that one.
Fair enough. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And hadn't John had some question about, or at the beginning about?
Well, in the paper, they talked about the governor changed the voting, and now it is strictly majority. There's no more super majorities or any of that stuff. He said to make the process easier. And I didn't know if the board needed to address that in any way.
So as I understand it, what we've read so far from town council, that's at town meeting, not actually as a variance or a special permit. That when you look to change a zoning bylaw at town meeting, then it's usually 2/3 majority. I think that's what got changed to just regular majority, 51%.
So the way the way they interpret it is that it's not on board decisions, it's on town meeting.
Yeah, and I'll reach out to town council to get further clarification. But is everything I've read so far is it's just at the town meeting level.
Okay.
But I'll confirm that.
Thank you.
It was
Anything else? All right, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
We have to take the vote.
All right, I know. Take a vote.
Okay.
John,
Aye.
voice vote with your name.
John Ellis, aye.
Mike,
Mike Gibbons, aye.
Ron,
Ron DiFilippo, aye.
Jess,
Jessica Gino, aye.
Sam Goodwin, aye. And with that, we say good night.